We are live, Chair. You can start.
Thank you, Charles. Right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's meeting of the panel. If you have any technical difficulties during the meeting, then please contact the Democratic Services Officer on call, who will attempt to assist you. Today's officer on call is Katie Brewer, and her number is 577046. Microphones must only be on if the participant has been granted permission to speak. To gain my permission to speak, please indicate on the chat and I will make a note and call you when it's your turn. Would everyone present please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls whilst the meeting is in progress. Please also refrain from checking emails and ensure that you're in a quiet room for the duration of the meeting. Please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and will subsequently be broadcast on the internet. Please can I ask that members of the panel to confirm that they are present at the meeting when I read out your name. Councillor Boyd.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Coleman Cook.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Curry.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Hopkinson. Councillor Hopkinson. No. Councillor Huxley.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Keane.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Pat Moore.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Paul Moore.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Linda Piper.
Here, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Rattigan.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Roper. Councillor Roper. No, can't see Councillor Roper. And Councillor Scott, I know is not here. He sent his apologies. Okay. I've received the following request to speak under 20.1, which is Councillor Garner on agenda item 7. Are there any other members wishing to speak under 20.1?
Hello, Councillor Bayford. Yes, I am here. And just to let you know, Councillor Roper is trying to get in. He's having some problems, so I've given him the number of Katie to give her a call. So hopefully he'll join us soon.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Apologies for absence. I've only received the one, which is from Councillor Scott. Have there been any others, Charles?
None that I'm aware of, Chair.
Okay.
Yes, Chair. I have received apologies from Councillor Hopkinson.
Okay. Is he not joining us at all?
No, I don't think he will be tonight.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Councillor Curry. Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? I can't see anyone indicating, so I'll take that as a no. Agenda item 3, to approve the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel meeting held on the 18th of February 2021, a copy of which was attached to the agenda pack. Could I have a proposer and a seconder for those, please?
I'll propose that, Chair.
Councillor Coleman Cook, thank you. A seconder, please.
I'll second that, Chair.
Councillor Curry, thank you very much. Unless I hear any objection, I'll take those minutes as approved. Agenda item 4, minutes of an extraordinary meeting. This is to approve the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel held on the 17th of March 2021, a copy of which was attached to the agenda pack. Could I please have a proposer for those, please?
I'll propose that, Chair.
Councillor Coleman Cook, and thank you. Councillor Curry, second.
I'll second that, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Unless I hear any objection, I will take those as approved. Thank you. Agenda item 5, domestic violence in Thanet, how Kent Police are addressing the issue. I'd now like to welcome to the meeting Chief Inspector Rhiannon Pepper to make a presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. So I was asked today, following our last meeting, just to talk a bit about domestic violence and domestic abuse in Thanet. Obviously, it's something I am really passionate about. And when I took over in November, it was an area that I thought really does need a lot of scrutiny. So for those of you that aren't aware, we have dedicated specialist officers that deal with domestic abuse. I think that's really important in the same way that we have it for hate crimes and the same way that we have it for rapes, to have that specialism and that overview. And it's to make sure that we have the best person looking into the offences, because quite a lot of the time it is a one-on-one offence and it's going to take a lot to get the trust of the victim. So I'll briefly go through this and then I'll talk about what I'm doing in Thanet. So domestic abuse recorded crime. If you have a look, you can see we had a significant jump last year, 11.8% jump in the recorded crime of domestic abuse. Again, if you look at the charts, you'll see that August, September is quite often a time that we see an increase. There are other times that we know we will see an increase in domestic abuse. So we know over Christmas we will see an increase. We know during the football we'll see an increase, and we can plan for that. So, and again, we'll come more into what our plans are and how we're dealing with that. So the next slide is recorded arrests. And again, you can see over the rolling 3 years, we've jumped up with our arrest rate. And that is really critical because we have to show that we are taking this seriously. And when it's proportionate and necessary to arrest, we must be doing that. And that is absolutely drilled into our officers at all levels, regardless of if they're first response, if they're CID, if they're the victim investigation team, which deals with domestic abuse. And the reason it's really important to get those arrests is to get that separation, to allow us time to go and speak to the victim without the offender's presence. And again, once I start talking about the plans, I'll explain again why that is so critical for us to be able to do that. If we have a look at recorded charges, you'll see, again, we have seen a huge jump in our recorded charges. This year, we have seen a real significant change towards our charge rate because we are putting the investment in it. We're putting the people in to do the investigations, but more importantly, we are changing the culture, and culture doesn't change quickly. So when I talk about changing the culture, looked across all the different forces to have a look at domestic abuse, how it's been dealing with it, what is the best way to get those prosecutions. And what was really clear is that when we look at our sister force, Essex, the way they approached it was different to the way we approached it in Kent, and certainly within Thanet. So from November, we started, it's called the 8-point plan. But the main crux of this is that you won't say when you attend, can I take a statement? When you attend domestic abuse, you will say, I am here to take a statement from you regarding what has just happened. You're taking the ownership away from the victim. You are telling them, I'm going to take this from you. This is really important. I need to get the best evidence. So that's the first one. The second big change is that we now leave an officer with the victim. As I'm sure you're all aware, with the call demand coming in, a lot of the time we arrest the offender, we take them back to custody, and then it's probably 2 to 3 hours before you get back to the victim. By which point, a lot of the time, they've normalised the behaviour. The offender's gone, they are now in a safer place, and they don't want to engage with us. And so we've seen a real change by leaving the officer there, getting that first evidential, the statement, making sure the body worn's on so we can record all the injuries, any damage, getting that really good evidential capture. And that's made a massive change as well, because it just shows we are taking this importantly, and we're not allowing them to normalise. We're not allowing them, once the offender's gone, to go, okay, that's fine, they're out the house, I don't need to worry about it. We're getting them and getting the best evidence we can at the time. So the charge rate is on the up. If we have a look at the arrest rates, you'll see we're probably mid, but you see the jump. So we are looking at about 42% of all domestic abuse that we attend, we arrest. The ones that we don't arrest, there's a good reason. Now, there is so much scrutiny. I've put so much scrutiny in this. So in my morning meetings, I will go through every single domestic abuse that we've attended in the last 24 hours, and I'll look what's been arrested, what hasn't been arrested. And if there hasn't been arrest, then must be a rationale so that I can understand why there hasn't been an arrest. And sometimes it is completely appropriate not to arrest. But the times where I've looked through and I don't think it's appropriate, the first thing I do is go back to the inspector. I will have a body-worn video check, and I'll say, what have they said to that victim? Why haven't we arrested? Why is there not a statement? On a weekly meeting with my inspectors, we will look through. Domestic abuse is part of the process, and I'll say, Talk me through. I want to know the body-worn video checks that you as inspectors have done on your staff to make sure that we are going across there and treating those victims correctly, making sure that when the officers are attending, they are taking it seriously, they are getting that buy-in and confidence from those victims, and we have those weekly checks in place. Again, when we look at the charge rates, you'll see from last year, 3.3, it has jumped to 6.4. That is a significant jump with charges. It's still not as high as I want, and we are again continuing to make progress, but it is putting that focus on domestic abuse, which is required. The next one is a DA intimate breakdown. That's just explaining, when we say intimate, that is intimate partners or ex-partners. So you have intimate and non-intimate. So non-intimate might be a mother and a son, or two brothers. They will go into the non-intimate. Intimate is partners or ex-partners. And again, if you look through, you'll see the breakdown. We will generally have between 72 and 76% are going to be intimate DA that we attend. And the last one, and then I'll just talk through a bit what we're doing, is repeat victims. And this is the key for me, because as you look down, you can see Thanet disproportionately has more 6 to 10 reports, over 10 reports. We have more repeat victims in Thanet. And I want to know why that is. Is it because we're not getting the confidence of the victim at the first one? Is it because we're not getting the buy-in? So again, with the specialist teams and the local police officers and our community safety unit, we're trying to do visits on those repeat victims. It's trying to build up their confidence. One officer continually speaking with that victim to get them to trust them, to get them to actually engage and to try and break down that offending pattern. And there's other things I've been looking at and implemented. So drug testing on arrival, underutilised. So drug testing on arrival is really important, I think, because there are certain crimes that you can automatically do it for, but an inspector and above can do it for other offences. So our repeat offenders, the ones that we know have got a drug problem, we need to be drug testing on arrival, because then we can put a positive obligation on them to go and get help. Now, the best case scenario is that help works and we can break that offending pattern. The worst case scenario is they don't go for that help, but actually by them not engaging, we are building a better picture when we take them to court to say, this is what we are trying to break this pattern. They are not engaging and we are more likely to get a successful outcome at court, which is really important. We've just had alcohol testing as well. That's literally just come out. And again, I'm talking with the vulnerability teams around where we know alcohol plays a big part in these offending. We need to be putting alcohol tags on the offenders. We really need to be breaking down over 10 reports, 17 people. That's 17 people that we're saying are constantly suffering. We need to be breaking this down and getting better at it. So I'll talk quickly about the 8-point plan. I say the real change here is the difference that we've had with our local officers, our first responders, and it's the why. When you ask somebody to do something, they will do it, but you must explain the why, and actually sitting down, going to the briefings, explaining that if you take this seriously, if you give them confidence in the first instance, if you get that best evidence, they will engage with us and we are likely to get successful prosecution. So it's the retraining. And it has worked. The culture has changed, and it's shown by our arrest rate and it's shown by our charge rate. But there's still work to do. As I say, my main focus at the moment is around those repeat victims, is how we can engage with them, how we can look at breaking that pattern, that behaviour. So something I'm really passionate about. We are heading in the right direction. There is a lot more that we need to do. I am acutely aware of that. But as a start in the last 6 months, I certainly think we've made some great strides, not only culturally, but also with our arrest rates and with our charge rates into making a dent in this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Members, questions, comments? Can't. All right, Councillor Keane.
Thank you. I mean, it sounds really good what you're doing. I just wanted to go back to, I think it was the first slide, and I think it was arrests, where in the 19 to 20 year, there were 130 in Thanet, and 20 to 21, there were 278. Now, I know you've said about, that you're doing this work, so that presumably will have increased that anyway. But I just wondered if you thought there was any other circumstances behind such a big increase.
I think because we've put the focus, and the vulnerability investigation teams has really put the focus on domestic abuse, and as part of Kent Police, it's an area that we need to improve on. And so, by raising that understanding, by raising that awareness, and by explaining, we take positive action, and that is the officers that are coming in, their training. It is absolutely embedded in them that we will take positive action unless there is a really discerning reason why not. So the arrest rate, I'm glad to see it rise, and I still like to see it rise a little bit more. As I say, I look through this every day, and there's sometimes ones where I go, I think we could have done more on that one. So I think it is that change that we will take positive action unless there is a real reason why we're not going to, and then it has to be evidenced. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Curry.
Hello there. Increase in domestic abuse. I wondered whether the increases have been in particular areas in Thanet, or has the increase been across the Isle? Thank you.
I haven't got the breakdown here, but having had a look through it, and as I say, paying quite keen attention to it since I've been here in November, it is very widespread. So there might be certain demographic areas that you think would have a higher rate, and that's just not the case. Domestic abuse is everywhere, through all our communities, regardless.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. It's really good to see the charge rates and how we're doing quite well in comparison to the rest of the county. It was just more of a question around, is this type of domestic abuse more the physical side of things, or how are you seeing more of a trend in increase of coercive control, emotional blackmail, those kind of things? So I think there's often a misconception that domestic abuse is just a physical assault. So I just wondered whether you've seen cases, because obviously they are probably quite more difficult to prosecute and evidence. So I just wondered if there's any work around that area of domestic abuse.
There is some work. I don't have the data with me now. You are right. We are seeing more coercive controlling behaviour. The majority of these will have a assault base to them, be it a common assault or higher, but we are certainly seeing a rise in coercive controlling behaviour. Sorry, easy for me to say. But again, that's to do with the training, again, with the police officers, so they can pick it up, whereas before it wasn't being recorded. Now officers are picking this up and recording this and understanding this is actually as important, and we need to deal with this as robustly as we would do if somebody had a physical injury. So yeah, we are seeing that trend increasing.
Right, I can't see any other members at the moment. I've got a couple of questions. The first is, I think you said that the charge rate, which is around about 6%, you were a bit disappointed with that. So a couple of questions around that. First is, what do you think inhibits the charge rate? And is the implication of your disappointment that charging is a major factor in stopping repeat behaviour?
Okay, I'll go with the first question first. Now, I think a big inhibitor is the fear of the repercussions, the fear of the offender. I think a big change is where we've sat there and immediately, whilst it's fresh in their mind, before they have a chance to normalise, and I keep saying this, because that hour or two that we leave with the offender, they calm down, they normalise what has happened. So actually getting that account straight away, I think, has made a big difference to the way that we deal with it. Certainly getting those statements. Over 75% now of the calls we attend, we get a statement straight away. And those we don't get a statement, we look at and it is not through lack of trying, it is that they do not want to engage with us on that occasion. And the only thing we can do there is to then do a follow-up visit to try and get them to engage at a later time. So I think the inhibitor is the engagement with the officers because of the fear of what's going to happen next, how's this going to affect me, and it is trying to break down that cycle. The second, sorry, if you throw the second question again, please.
Well, yeah, the first one was what inhibits the charge rate, and the second one was whether you thought that charging was a major factor in stopping repeat offending.
I think there's a lot of factors that need to be explored around stopping that repeat offending. I think charges do play a part, especially in those serial offenders that are constantly doing it, be it with the same partner, be it with different partners. I think that does play a part, but equally, I really do think the help around the drug testing, the help around the alcohol, the factors that are causing them to behave in that manner, so the anger management, I think they equally are as important. Taking those steps with the offender to look at their behaviour and their patterning and how we can break that down.
Thank you. Councillor Boyd, you wanted to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just another thing. I was watching, half watching Brekkie Telly yesterday morning, and there was a piece around domestic abuse on it. I don't know where it was, but they were basically training up plumbers and people that visit homes to be aware of marks on the walls or doors where they've been locked in a bathroom or handles. And I just wondered whether there'd be a potential for future work between yourself and possibly Penny and the community team, in some engagement with our local housing service providers, people that do utilities, just to kind of get more awareness. Because I presume you're quite restricted to neighbours hearing stuff, or as opposed to people that actually go into homes. So I just wondered whether that was an area you might look into in the future.
I absolutely love that idea. I think that is I didn't see it. I think that is a cracking idea, and it's definitely something I'll take away and then link in with, because you're right. It is a lot of the time it's not the victim that phones us; it's a third party. But by having people raising the awareness, same way we did with child sexual exploitation, making sure the taxis, that the doormen, that the licensees were aware, raising that awareness means we are more likely to get those early indications and reports of where domestic abuse is taking place. So actually, I really love that idea. I think that is a really good idea and one that we can go forward with.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, Councillor Keane.
Thank you. A separate question, and that was just where there's young children present, do the police automatically refer to social services, or is that a judgment call?
No, while the children are present, we automatically will do a referral so that they're aware, and then we also refer locally to schools as well, so that the head teachers are aware that we've attended, because obviously the impact on that child, the head teachers need to know what is going on in their home life, because that could explain some of the behaviour in schools. So we are very good at making sure all our partners are kept aware, especially with children. Voice of the child is really, really key within Kent Police. It's making sure that we're listening and looking after those children in those premises.
That's great, thank you.
Okay. I can't see any other questions. I've got one last one. I mean, domestic abuse is, I think in most people's minds, is associated with female victims, but we know that there are male victims. Do you have any sort of figures for the split in Thanet?
No, I don't have the figures, but you're absolutely right. There are male victims. I don't have the figures, but again, as I say, because I go through them every morning, I see the female to male ratio. It is still predominantly male against female, but there is certainly a percentage of male victims. And I think sometimes it's harder for them to make that call or have that conversation because of the way society looks at domestic abuse. And again, that's something we're trying to really work with those males that have reported domestic abuse, to make sure they've got the support, they've got the welfare in place around them.
Okay, thank you. I hasten to add I wasn't speaking from experience. Can I, on behalf of the panel, can I thank you very much for the presentation and you answering the questions. And I mean, it would be really good if you could be a regular visitor. I know we've covered a couple of areas. I know there's other areas of policing that members would be interested in. But certainly, you know, perhaps in 12 months' time, a follow-up on what you did last time and this time would, I think, be very helpful if you'd be prepared to do that.
Absolutely. Always happy to discuss what we're doing in Thanet. So if there are areas you want me to discuss, just let me know. And again, I'm quite happy to come along and talk about them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Right, members, moving on. Agenda item 6, Memorials Working Party update. I call upon Councillor Stuart Piper, Chair of the Memorials Working Party, to give us an update.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. There is a report attached for this item, which is similar to so he can make the final decision about the application in question. Historic England and the Secretary of State will apply the new policy of retain and explain, meaning historic statues will only be removed in the most exceptional circumstances. I think the idea behind that, Chair, is it's probably self-explanatory. It's designed to stop knee-jerk reactions such as we had not so long ago with the memorial plaque in Broadstairs. The Secretary goes on to say, what has stood for generations should be considered thoughtfully, not removed on a whim. Any removal should require planning permission, and local people should have a chance to be properly consulted. Our policy in law will be clear that we believe in explaining and retaining heritage, not tearing it down. An important little footnote at the bottom, it says the new rules will also apply to unlisted historic plaques, memorials and monuments, which will also require planning permission, and Historic England will be informed. Chair, I haven't had any further explanation about looking forward to proposals to erect new statues or plaques and monuments, but I would imagine the planning permission clauses would still apply, but I'm sure that our proper officer will put that in the final report when it's prepared for you. Thank you very much. I commend that to members.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Members, the proposal is that we should, if you like, sort of, I don't know what the correct terminology is, and perhaps Charles can help me out, but we should sort of suspend temporarily the activities of the Working Party pending the national legislation coming into force, then, you know, bringing it back into action as soon as that happens. But by doing that, that will give us the opportunity to run a very short review of something else in the meantime, which I think would be very good use of members' time. Chairman, are you happy with that?
Yes, yes, indeed.
Okay, thank you. Members, comments, please. Okay, I can't see anybody wanting to make any comments. So therefore, can I propose from the chair that we do, as I've just outlined, that we sort of temporarily suspend activity of this Working Party pending national legislation being introduced, which will allow the panel to authorise another piece of work in the short term. Does that find a seconder anywhere?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman-Cook. Members, is that agreed?
Agreed.
I can see lots of nodding. I can't see anybody objecting. So I'll take that as agreed. Thank you, members. Thank you very much. Okay. Agenda item 7, planning enforcement review. This is a follow-up from the item that we had in February when the panel received a report from Ian Livingston. I'd like to open this discussion by hoping that we can this afternoon agree a way forward. The proposal in general that I would make is that we would in fact set up a small working party, maybe 6-7 members, with the idea that they would actually inform the review of the enforcement protocol the planning department are looking at the moment, and that perhaps a single meeting of that working party might be sufficient to come up with suggestions that could be brought back to this panel for onward passing to the executive. So I'd ask you to think about that for a minute while I bring in Councillor Garner, who wishes to speak under 20.1.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bayford. Thank you, and thank you, members, for allowing me to speak at this meeting. I spoke at the last overview and scrutiny meeting when planning enforcement was discussed, asking for a scrutiny project to be kicked off urgently to conduct a proper open review into the effectiveness of the enforcement function within planning as a whole, and to explore ways in which it can be expanded and improved. The main reason I thought, and I still think, this is necessary relates to the climate emergency we all passed nearly 2 years ago now. A number of policy amendments have been made to the local plan to protect our natural environment and enhance the biodiversity across the district. Many of these new policies will result in planning applications being passed with tougher climate emergency biodiversity related conditions. It is vital that not only do we work with developers to make sure they understand what we expect from them, but also that we have an enforcement function that makes sure they do what's expected. As it stands, I do not believe that we have an enforcement function equipped to be able to do this. As is noted in the report before you, the enforcement team works in a reactive rather than proactive way. On the whole, once the planning application is passed, developers are left to get on with it, and enforcement officers only get involved if they receive a complaint from a member of the public. As is also noted in the report, TDC's enforcement team of 2 is the smallest in the county. A thorough review is needed to identify ways in which the process can be improved so that the effective enforcement function we need can be put in place quickly. The proposal for discussion this evening is, I believe, inadequate for 2 reasons. Firstly, the review team should be open for contributions from members of the public, not just concerned residents, but also representatives of the development companies who the enforcement team need to work with. Secondly, if we really want this to be a meaningful review that will actually make a difference, a single meeting to review the planning enforcement protocol with officers isn't enough. I would respectfully suggest that a team with a wider remit than that is required, to include meeting with the planning services manager and planning enforcement officers to understand and review current planning enforcement protocols and working practices, and inviting representatives of local developers and concerned members of the public to meet with the team to discuss current working practices and explore ideas to improve the process before proposing changes to improve the process with agreement from all of those involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Members, any comments from anyone? Okay, Councillor Keane.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree with what Councillor Garner has said. I think a wider remit would be more beneficial. I would also like to know more about how other councils are dealing with this, because I do think, partly because of our small team, but that we do have particular problems here in our reactive approach. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Roper.
Yes, I would like to reiterate that again, and support Councillor Gardner, that having just 2 enforcement officers is just nowhere near enough to keep on top of all the problems that arise. And I seem to hear countless of times when enforcement officers just don't have the time to do their job properly. So it really does need an in-depth review, I feel. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? I've got Mr. Willis and Mr. Porter are present. Do either of you wish to make any comment at this stage? And I understand if you don't want to.
Chairman, would you mind if I make a comment?
Fine.
Chair. Obviously, it's for members to articulate and describe the terms of reference for this action. I think obviously, and I'm sure you will consider that any kind of outcomes from any review will need inevitably to take into account the availability of resources to support any kind of outcomes that fall out of that. And also it's about managing expectations. If there's a suggestion that we engage directly with the public, then obviously that also has to be managed in the sense of understanding what resources would be available to support any aspirations that they may be sharing. And also I would just raise the fact that the time, officers' time will need to be taken into account in respect of actually supporting this review. So we just need to be mindful that we approach it in a sensible manner, because obviously officers are already very busy, but appreciate the fact that members will have a significant involvement in doing some of the work, or I'm assuming that members will have an involvement in doing some of the work.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Huxley.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to say I'd like to be, if you were going to set up a subcommittee, I'd like to be on that. The planning enforcement review isn't just about new builds, it's about listed buildings in places like Ramsgate in the conservation areas. So that's an important part of it as well. Thanks.
Okay. Members, I mean, having listened to Councillor Garner and other members, obviously, think the valid points that have been made. The reason that I was looking at a single meeting review really was in recognition of the scarcity of resource, and in fact taking advantage of the fact that we were standing down the Memorials Working Party. But that clearly may be a fairly temporary thing. So what I'd like members to think about, I've got a couple of other people to come in a minute, what I'd like members to think about is whether we could run with the idea of a single meeting for a review, which would be, as I say, 6 or 7 members from this committee, from this panel, with appropriate officers, which has already been agreed in principle by Mr. Livingston. He could support that, but that review group actually takes a wide view, and as it reports back to the panel, if it does think that an in-depth review would be worthwhile, it could think about how that might operate and bring those recommendations back, which would enable then us to set up a committee, a review committee, with perhaps a wider remit than I was thinking of in the first instance. Councillor Curry, you've got your hand up. You're muted, Councillor Curry, I think.
I'll drop my hand and...
Okay.
From
the top.
From the top again, yeah. Thanks, Chair. I just going to say, I think panel members do hear from residents, and we can take residents' concerns forward. I think this is what gives Scrutiny its value, having a close connection with residents. And I think a panel would hear from residents and take their concerns forward. And I do think a single meeting would take this forward quicker than something that took a very long time, where we were talking to so many people. We've got bogged down in too many proposals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, are there any other comments? And if not, can I take it that there's, that we would be happy to start off with this single meeting? Quite a lot of nodding going on. In that case, could I ask for 6 or 7 volunteers, please? Ideally, somebody from the planning, at least one person who's on the planning committee would be useful. We've got Councillor Huxley.
Yes, Chair. I'd be willing to be on that.
Councillor Coleman Cook. Sorry.
I'd be willing to go on that, Chair. Councillor Linda Piper.
Linda Piper, yeah.
Although I'm not on the planning committee, I have done the training.
No, I mean, it's essential that we've got both, you know, some planners and some non. Yeah, okay.
I would, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Rattigan. Yeah.
I would, Chair. Councillor Paul Moore.
Paul Moore, yeah.
I'd be happy, Chair, if you need one more there.
Councillor Curry. Okay, I think that's, you know, reasonable cross section. I think that would be quite good. Can I just start? I mean, Councillor Roper. We don't have a Green Party representative on there. I wondered if you might be interested.
Thank you for the offer, but I think I'm going to have to decline for personal reasons.
Okay, fair enough. In which case, we have a panel of or suggested review team of Councillors Huxley, Coleman Cook, Councillor Linda Piper, Councillor Rattigan, Councillor Paul Moore, Councillor Curry. So is that agreed, members? Yeah. Can I just ask, Chief Executive, you've heard the proposal. Are you comfortable with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Members, take that as agreed then. Thank you very much. Agenda item 8. Right. Impact of COVID-19 on businesses and communities in... Oh, sorry. Councillor Keane, sorry, didn't see you.
I just wanted to check on my screen. Councillor Garner looks like he's frozen because I thought he might be interested in being on the thing. So I didn't want him to miss out on his opportunity if that was the case.
The reason I didn't go to Councillor Garner was that it was a panel, it was a group drawn from this panel in the first instance.
Oh, I see. Yeah, no, I see. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, though, Councillor King. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I would obviously would, but...
Okay. Councillor Rattigan, I think the choice chair will be sorted out actually at the meeting. Okay. So, try again with agenda item 8. Impact of COVID-19 on businesses and communities in Thanet. I'd now invite the Chief Executive to share some ideas of how the panel might approach this topic. After that, perhaps we could have a bit of a discussion about the way we might see the way forward. So, Maddie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, members. I'm just going to take the opportunity just to share with you some things that we have achieved over the last year in relation to our response to COVID-19. And then I've got 4 options that I'm going to suggest just to prompt a discussion. It will be for you to decide which, if any of those, or a variation of those you want to take forward. But I just thought it was only right, really, for all of us in TDC just to recognise what we have been doing over the past year. And this is just some of the main things. Obviously, it's not everything. And I think we're all accept that this year's been it's been unlike any other year. I mean, obviously, Thanet is a busy time at the best of places, but I think we'd all recognise that the challenges the pandemic has created this year were things that we hadn't anticipated. However, saying that, I think it's also fair to say that we were actually actively responding to the COVID-19 pandemic before the first lockdown in March. And sometimes I think we forget about that. So even before lockdown, we had reviewed and refreshed our business continuity plans in light of the emerging crisis of COVID-19. We'd already provided capacity for home working, including training sessions and crib sheets for staff to enable them to access the systems appropriately. We provided staff with regular updates on the situation, including access to frequently asked questions, and we established an officer group including all senior management, who met regularly to review the situation and make sure that we could respond and take action. And then, of course, as we all know, in March, or March the 23rd, came the national lockdown, and which for most industries, I guess, this meant reduced work, not necessarily positive for them. But for us as a council, and all of us as a council, that meant everyone stepping up and actually working harder. Which in itself is quite a challenge, because I'm sure you appreciate we are quite lean as an organisation from a resource point of view. But within the first week, we managed to we dealt with reducing access to the offices, put in increased regimes and hand sanitisers, established back office support for those working from home, such as scanning and printing assistants. We closed off public spaces such as playgrounds. We'd maintained our refuse collection services. We'd allowed residents with parking permits to park in council car parks free of charge and suspended parking charges for all NHS and social care workers. We set up and staffed a dedicated 7-day-a-week phone line to support our vulnerable residents to access services and supplies. We worked with partners to provide these essential supplies, because obviously we couldn't do that solely ourselves. So we actually had to pull on our network of community and third sector organisations, which we'd already built a very good relationship with. We contributed to a Kent-wide dedicated business support line, and we provided temporary housing for all those who were sleeping rough at that time. In addition to that, and as we move through the year, we've telephoned or visited over 6,000 extremely vulnerable residents. We have distributed £92,000 worth of support for the extremely vulnerable through food provision. We've distributed £113,000 in support for those in fuel poverty. We have issued warnings and prohibition notices to business who flouted the restrictions. We've responded to the biggest influx of visitors to the coast that we've seen in a long time, and you'll all be aware of that last summer as part of our beach management plan. And again, obviously, we've enhanced that for this year. We increased the toilet cleaning regime, very importantly, as a result of maintaining or trying to prevent outbreaks of COVID-19. We were the first council in Kent to hold an online licensing subcommittee. We used innovative antibacterial coatings on high touch points, such as parking machines. We temporarily closed roads to support the reopening of high streets in July. We distributed discretionary test and trace support funding, and we set up an enforcement team specifically for COVID business enforcement and advice. We also provide a door knocking service for track and trace, and we continue to do that as that's a requirement to still track any variations in COVID-19. We introduced COVID wardens for the high streets. We created the beach management plan, which I've already mentioned. We provided sites for 2 drive-in testing facilities and Kent's first walk-in testing site. We worked with partners to ensure our homeless population had access to vaccines as a vulnerable group, and we've worked with local GPs on how to get vaccinations to the populations where take-up was low. On enforcement work, we've responded to 186 requests for advice, and that's since January 2021 this year, investigated 89 complaints for non-compliance, undertaken 597 compliance visits, given 57 informal notices, and given 195 verbal warnings. We have 4 COVID wardens patrolling the towns and open spaces 7 days a week between the hours of 10 and 6. And so far we've spoken to 851 businesses around guidance and compliance advice, and 1,861 members of the general public. I'm now going, and in addition to that, we have also, of course, been engaged in the Kent-wide response. I've chaired the Vulnerable People and Community Cell, and other officers have been key players in the enforcement, environment and finance cells, as well as various other task and finish groups. And of course, we have engaged quite significantly over the period in our tactical command group meetings and the strategic command group meetings, as I'm sure some of you appreciate. They were at one point happening on a daily basis, including over Christmas. On that point, I am now just going to hand over to Tim Willis, who's just going to take us through the grants that he and his team have been busy working on. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Chair. lots of numbers, so I'm going to try and keep this to as few numbers as possible. Business grants and business rate relief. We did start the lockdown last year with business rates relief, and we administered £22 million worth of rates relief in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector. And then since then, there's been sort of 3 tranches of business grants. We started off last spring and summer. There's been 2 types, sort of mandatory and discretionary. And the first tranche, we distributed £34 million worth of grants, which included 1.6 million of discretionary grants. Then during the lockdowns that started in November, there were a series of payments, another 2 grant schemes. We've just distributed about £20 million, £4 million of which was discretionary. That was called the ARGs. And now we have restart grants, which were launched on the 9th of April, which we estimate will be worth about 11 million. And we have another discretionary scheme, which we launched on the 12th of April, which we are expecting 750,000 for that. I think one of the key factors in relation to the resourcing that's been needed in terms of administration for the council is that we've administered all of the discretionary schemes, and just the winter discretionary scheme alone has generated 5,500 emails to businesses and from businesses over the last 3 months for the ARG team, all of whom are volunteers and do the work on top of their day jobs. So overall, we've paid out about £70 million of grants to businesses over the last year or so, and £22 million of rate relief. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you. Shall I present the 4 options? I'm just going to, if I may, Chair, just going to present those just so that you've got them in front of you, if that's okay. There's nothing sophisticated about them. They're just my thoughts, just to prompt a bit of discussion for you.
Okay.
I hope you can see those. So we've got 4 options there. Option 1 is that we provide overview and scrutiny with a presentation on our response to COVID-19 between March 2020 and March 2021, so a year. Or option 2, overview and scrutiny could undertake a how did we do review of TDC's initial response to the first lockdown, March 2020 to June 2020, including continuation of service delivery and our engagement with Kent Resilience Forum as part of the emergency response. Option 3, that you review how we've managed the government's COVID funding streams, including, as Tim's obviously just shared, business grants, safely opening the high streets and the clinically extremely vulnerable funds. There are some other additional ancillary funds that we could include in that as well. Option 4, that you review our community response during the pandemic, specifically the work of the community hub and our engagement with the voluntary sector.
Okay, thank you for that. 4 good options. Members, comments, please. You've stunned everybody into silence, Maddie.
Oh, well, I mean, we could start with a presentation to you on, if in a bit, which gives a bit more detail on the things that we've sort of highlighted this evening, and then take it from there. It's up to you, really, how you want to take that forward.
Okay.
Chair, can we go for option 4, please?
Option 4?
Yeah, because we've had quite in-depth information about the business grants, and I'd be interested to see what our community thinks about how the council responded to the COVID restrictions and all that they have done. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I quite like that. I also quite like option 2, which isn't very helpful, I know, but we have a proposal for option 4. Does that find seconder anywhere?
I'd second that, Chair.
Councillor Paul Moore. Okay. Okay, so if we go for option 4, I suppose what we'd be looking for is to bring to future meeting, perhaps the next meeting of overview and scrutiny, some proposals of how we might go about that and what would be the most effective structure. Would you be able to organise that, Chief Exec?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. I'll put some terms of reference together and some structure around that and a proposal for how you might be involved in that, because I think it's important that, and clearly that's what this is about, making sure that you're involved in that review. And depending on how that goes, there's no reason why we can't revisit option 2 once we've done option 4, if you still want to do that.
Fine. Okay. Members, does that find agreement? Again, I can't see any objections. I can see some nodding. So we'll bring back to the next meeting of overview and scrutiny some proposals for how we go about instituting option 4. Is that agreed? Right. Thank you very much, members. Thank you, Tim and Maddie, for the contributions there. Agenda item 9, review of OSP work programme. Members are invited to comment on the work programme, and if there are no comments, members are requested to note the report. Is that noted? Thank you. Agenda item 10, forward plan and exempt cabinet report list for period 10th of March to 31st of August 2021. Unless there's something from the plan that the panel would wish to consider, members are asked to note the report. Okay, that's duly noted. Members, officers, thank you very much for your time. I wish you good evening. Thank you very much.